Today we're looking at a CTS Turbo IS38. It's like for an Audi or a Volkswagen 2.0T, an upgrade from the IS30 or IS20. But yeah, a common bolt-on upgrade for like a Golf GTI. And this one is on the absolute ragged edge of blowing up. So, as an example of what to look for, like tons of lateral play. Most notably on this guy, absolute ton of thrust play. So we'll get to stripping this thing down and take a look. Now it didn't have enough lateral play to actually touch the housing, so this is going to be savable. Though it did just skim it, so there's like the lightest burr on the edge of the wheel, which wouldn't really pose a problem, but yeah, much more runtime on this thing and it would have been a total disintegration. So to get started, top nut here is a 12.8 mil. Bottom nut is going to be a 12.12 mil. And most notably, this is a counterclockwise or reverse rotation blade set. So this nut is going to be regular left-hand thread. So just typical loosening position on your socket to loosen. I've cracked all these bolts already, so it's a lot easier to take apart. We're not going to struggle this time. But yeah, typical left-hand thread to loosen. And you got a little balancing mark on the nut. I also noticed that there's some factory balance alignment marks. And those alignment marks are also on the wheel here. So yeah, this thing got enough thrust play to just touch the back of the wheel. I didn't notice any dusting. So it's still, the balance of this is going to be fine. But similarly, just some kind of fine micro scratching on the back. This shield also kind of acts like the thrust plate on this turbo. And then 4 bolts to retain it. And they look like a metric Allen key. And rather than a rubber O-ring type seal on this type of turbo, they tend to use silicone. I've already tapped this apart. Yeah, you got some silicone there. So that's going to be fun to clean. You also have to be wary when rebuilding this thing that you're not putting so much in that it's going to smear into your bearing assembly. That would be a big problem on this. And you got your thrust collar like integrated right into that front plate. So it looks like a factory 360 thrust. No oil holes or kind of like veining for oil capacity on the back here. Might have to give that a bit of a tap. Just classic heat shield. And your rear oil seal. It doesn't look like this has ever leaked, actually. There's no oil buildup at all. So the turbines and whatnot are in pretty good condition. Looks like it's an 8-blade, some kind of high nickel alloy. So good overall components and lots of usable stuff here. It's a decent little turbine wheel. I kind of like the aerodynamics. It's got a extended tip turbine, which I actually haven't seen before. It's kind of neat. So it's not a surprise that there was kind of advanced bearing wear on this. This red orange silicone is definitely not factory. So this looks like it was rebuilt previously by a shop or a previous owner, and I noticed that the balance marks on all your different components were misaligned. So this was rebuilt and put out of balance and led to a quick bearing failure, both on the journal bearings and in particular on the thrust bearings. So I don't know who that was, or if it was, a shop or an individual, but good demonstration of why it's important to mark all your orientation when you're first assembling and return orientation to that point. And I would argue for sure that any torque spec on the nut is less important than a little bit of thread lock and just getting the orientation correct. That torque spec may change as you are, disassembling, reassembling. There's, microscopic changes in the parts that are going to change the thrust, whether it's installed with or without oil, without thread lock. So focus less on torque spec of the nut and more on preservation of orientation. So next, just small Phillips head screws here retaining the thrust bearing. There's actually not a ton of thrust wear on this guy, which is surprising because it was definitely having thrust issues in this direction. So it looks like it runs like a kind of a thrust washer. And this guy here is very, very worn. Yeah, you can see some actual like bluing from heat buildup on the back. Looking at this, I don't see any oil orifices, so it doesn't look to be actively oiled, which is kind of interesting. And it's only got those like chamfers for oil grooving on the front, but yeah, like this washer has actually worn straight up into this guy, worn its own channel. So that is definitely a failed part right there. And we'll get some replacements and upgrades for this, I think. Outside that, just some typical journal bearings. Not heavily worn on the outside, but yeah, quite scored up on the inside. There's actually like a little burr. So the brass is like folding over and making a burr on the inside. Definitely roasted, but very small, like a TD04 size or less, I'd say. And no real concerns on the actual housing. Looks good for reuse. Now on the back, instead of a snap ring, it looks like it's got kind of like a crimped push-in piece of sheet metal. And I definitely don't like that compared to a snap ring, because having those rings actually sets the amount of play that bearing has laterally, and this is obviously just pushing it straight in, which might cause that bearing to not spin properly. I wonder if there's a snap ring groove behind there that I'm going to find. But let's work at getting this out real quick. And I'm not too worried about damaging the bearing in this case because it's definitely getting reused. Just how much this is going to fight me. It did rotate there. Let's go at it with a straight pick and try to just get it out. So not the most impressive piece of technology. You can see that there's wear on the back. Probably from installation, it's pushed right down on the bearing and then has to self-clearance. Don't love that system. And taking a look, there's no snap ring groove, so that is what it is. I guess upon closer inspection, the casting has a lip, so it presses on the casting lip and does leave a tiny amount of space here for that clearance, but not an ideal setup, I would say. I think that thing could easily pop out while you're driving and cause problems. Next bearing similar, decent on the exterior casting side and all chewed up on the inside. So I'm going to take measurements off these, either get some bearings made or hopefully there's a kit available, and look at some upgrades, and then we'll reassemble this. I might even go ahead and get upgraded turbine. It's just something made in Connell, and an upgraded wheel. So yeah, right off the bat, there's opportunity to slim that nose to the nut diameter, gain a bit of flow, put some extended tips on it. Look at the height of this. I mean, there's certainly room here for increasing the blade height. So yeah, we'll do something. Let me know if you like that video. Like and subscribe. More content coming soon. I got a ton of stuff in the works, building a ton of turbos here going into spring. And hopefully I'll give you a tour of my actual build, boosted K24 Frankenstein with the 3-lobe head and all that. So yeah, thanks for joining me. See you next time.